He says, I punch it in the computer and that car's registered to some guy from New Jersey and the car's in here now getting an oil change. So why is this guy getting a key cut? I said, do me a favor, fax me every title he's sent you. So he sends me like 7 titles and I'm running the VIN numbers. Stolen, stolen, stolen. I said, I know what he's doing. So I says, when is he coming back? He goes, later in the week. I said, all right, let's set up for Thursday. It's Thursday, my partner and I get there bright and early. I tell the manager, do me a favor, call him up, tell him the key's ready. And me and my partner put on BMW outfit. My partner hung out in the waiting area. And I told the manager, when he comes in, just kind of give me the nod and go in the back. Don't want you getting involved in this. He goes, okay. Guy comes in, big Dominican kid, tattoos, throws the title at me, barks me, here for my key. I said, okay. It was like $75 or something. Hands me 100. It's like the first time I've made change since I worked at McDonald's. Like, okay. So I go, oh, I got something for you. You're our 100th customer. So I come from behind the counter and my partner sneaks up on him. We cuff him up.
Okay, so for the audience here, you will not be bored at all. We're going to go through a lot of stories here, but my next guest, I would consider the quintessential New Yorker as he's telling stories here. But we're going to get into it right here. Can you introduce yourself for me, please?
Yeah. My name is Vic Ferrari. I'm a retired NYPD detective turned author.
Yeah, Vic. So what's the name of your podcast?
NYPD Through the Looking Glass podcast.
Okay. What I find fascinating is you've written one, two, at least 4 books, right?
8.
Eight, 8 books.
Yeah, I average about 1 a year.
Okay, so I'm on this tour in Florida talking to people, and I'm talking to all these, these authors now that have all these stories. I mean, obviously, you must have a fantastic memory to remember everything that was going on in NYPD and kind of, putting down the stories. Do people call you with stories, or this is just stuff that you've actually remembered over the course of your career?
Both. I did have a photographic memory at one time. It's starting to, I think I'm running out of RAM. But yeah, my friends now, when I'm talking to them, they'll feed me story. "Oh, you should write about this guy. Remember when this happened?" But I would say now it used to be 100% of memory. Now it's probably about 65% memory and 30. And then they'll feed me stories. I'm like, that's not funny,
Yeah.
or that's not going anywhere, or I can't tell that story.
Yeah.
When I got into writing these books, the two things. Actually, Sonny Grasso, the detective that worked on the French Connection case, gave me a good piece of advice. And he said, don't get it, if you're going to write a book, don't get anybody divorced or in trouble. And that's pretty much the way I roll.
It seems like there's a lot of humor in your books, though. There's a lot of finding the funny thing, maybe even out of tragedy, but finding the funny stuff that's going on. And then, yeah, it's really, and I can't recommend this book enough, the Through the Looking Glass one, because that's the only one I've read. I didn't get to the other 7 books, but it was found it so fascinating because it really gives you a look of what the NYPD is really about and what's really going on at the
Thank you. I appreciate
time. So let's start from the beginning. Give me an idea of your background, where you grew up, and ultimately what led you to law enforcement.
So I was born and raised in the Bronx, the Frog's Neck section, Irish and Italian Catholic neighborhood. I knew by about the age of 5, I wanted to be a New York City police officer. There was a snowstorm, and my grandfather was out and broke his leg, and 2 policemen brought him home in the snowstorm. And I was a little boy, and I remember these cops were giants. They carried my grandfather into the house. They had these blue uniforms with the buttons, and they got that gun hanging on the hip. And like, who are these guys? What do they eat? Where do they come from? A couple of years later, my mother's taken me to Saturday matinees. There was a movie theater on Tremont Avenue called the Interborough. And right around the corner from the Interborough was the 45th police station or precinct. And I remember being more impressed by walking by the police station than Herbie the Love Bug. So I would run up to the police cars and look in the window, look at the equipment. I would watch the cops coming out of the station house. And again, every little boy is fascinated with that gun. I was amazed at like the way they interacted and the way they'd lean on their gun. And I said, that's what I want to do. And then there was a heavy influence on television. Adam 12, The French Connection, The Seven Ups, all these cop movies, TV shows later on, Hill Street Blues. So I knew what I wanted to do. By age 10 or 12, my friends and I, we would sneak into the local post office and steal FBI wanted posters and then go around the neighborhood conducting manhunts. So, picture a bunch like little rascals, a bunch of little boys walking into a deli, and there's some poor construction worker waiting for his Italian combo. And you got a bunch of little boys looking at him like he looks like this guy that's wanted for a bank robbery, interstate flight out of Louisiana. We're lucky we didn't get our asses kicked. So I knew what I wanted to do. My parents wanted me to go to college. I would have none of it. And they didn't really understand SATs. They both worked. And so I got out of high school by the skin of my teeth. I went to Catholic high school. That was probably the best thing in the world for me. I know you had another auto crime detective, John Stiastion, and I needed the discipline. I was a wild kid. I was a smart ass. I remember I went to public school for the first 8 grades, and I remember my father saying, "You're going to Catholic high school next year." I'm like, "What? We don't even go to mass." And he goes, "You're a clown, and if I send you to public school, you're going to be a bigger clown." He said, "So pick a high school run by the men in black." So I did. I went to a Catholic high school for 4 years. Absolutely was the best thing in the world for me. And the high school I went to was like a cop factory. So picture this, my graduating year, out of 250 boys, it was an old boys school, 40 became NYPD members. The year before that, there were 50. The year after that, there were 60. So it's like the way Penn State produced NFL linebackers, or LSU now produces wide receivers. St. Raymond's High School for boys produced cops and firemen.
Wow. So tell me, your father's Irish, your mother's Italian. What do they do? What are they doing for a living?
My dad was a butcher. Um, he worked out in a wholesale meat place in Queens, and he used to bring me to work with him. And I was a little boy, and this is before OSHA regulations, and he would bring me to work on Sundays, and I was making chopped meat and sausage, and what I didn't realize was this place was owned by organized crime. My father wasn't a mobster; he was Irish, but he needed a job, and he worked there. So I remember one day my father sent me up to the second floor to get something. And as I'm going up these concrete steps, a man comes tumbling down the steps and almost crashes into me. And I'm looking at the bottom of the stairs, and the guy looked like he had Parkinson's, like his hands were all busted up. And he's like, "Help me, help me." These two big Italian guys are laughing and they're coming down the stairs and they're like, "Oh, Vic, don't worry about him. He's an old friend of ours." And I'm like, "Friend? What were these guys doing to an enemy?" And the guy is like, "Help me, help me." They pick the guy up, they drag him down the stairs, and I watch. And they threw him out in the street where the garbage was. So my dad's trimming steaks. I go downstairs. I'm like, "Dad, Vito and Anthony just kicked the shit out of some guy and tossed him in the street." My father goes, "All right, just keep working. I'll find out what's going on." Okay. He didn't really seem to upset him. So on the way home, I bring it up again. And my father goes, "Vic, some people just don't learn." And I says, "Learn what?" And he says, "That guy's a shoplifter." He goes, "Last year he tried to steal a couple of steaks. They smacked him around. They told him don't come around here no more. Today they catch him with a slab of ribs down his pants. So they brought him upstairs. They tuned him up a little bit. He got a little belligerent. They put his hands in a vice. They broke his fingers and they threw him out of the store." I was like, "Oh." And that was the last day I worked with my father. He goes, "You're getting a little bit older. You're starting to see things. I don't want you around this. I don't want you to be a butcher. I want you to go to school." And I was devastated because those Sundays meant a lot to me. And, I kind of got that taken away from me. So I went from that to McDonald's a couple of years later, which you can't compare.
Yeah. How about your mom?
My mom was a housewife pretty much my childhood until my brother and I were, latchkey kids. We were on our own,
Mhm.
doing our own thing. Then she started working in like the local bank and bookkeeping.
Mm. Growing up at the time with your brother, how is New York? Safe at the time?
My neighborhood policed itself. I always used to say the neighborhood was Irish, Italian, and a little bit of the mob sprinkled in. So people didn't really go to the cops when there was a problem. You would go to like the local warlord if there was a problem. The cops were there, but they were kind of doing their own thing. But New York City in the 70s and 80s was a bad place. I mean, New York almost went into bankruptcy. There was a lot of crime, but my neighborhood kind of policed itself. It was somewhat safe. Now, I remember as a kid getting on the subway, during the Christmas holidays with my mother to go shopping or to catch a show. And like that was a different world. I remember driving through the South Bronx once a week, taking the Cross Bronx Expressway out to Jersey where my father had two sisters. Like, wow, like South Bronx, like this is like abandoned buildings. Like this isn't where we live. So where I lived was fine, but once you kind of stepped out, you were in another world.
Yeah. What'd your brother end up doing?
My younger brother, he'd be a good interview. My younger brother, he was a correction officer. He worked on Rikers Island for 5 years, and then he kind of followed me into the New York City Police Department.
Okay. Just one brother?
Yeah.
Okay. At what point you want to be NYPD the whole
Oh,
time?
yeah.
At, when do you start applying?
So you had to be 20 years old, I think, to be eligible to take the test and be hired. I signed up for the test about 20, and then 21, I went into the police academy.
Okay, so you get hired right away then.
Yeah, it didn't take much time from the time I remember. I think I got like the letter to begin the process in like February, and then I went into the police academy in July of '87.
So how does it work for New York or NYPD? I've talked to people on the West Coast. I've talked to guys in Chicago, some in Florida. Do you have to have a 4-year degree? Do you have to go to an academy before? I mean, just explain that to me how it works.
Yeah, New York City. So back then,
Yeah.
now it's changed.
Yeah.
High school diploma was fine, and as long as you didn't have ties to organized crime, you didn't have a criminal record, you didn't use drugs, there was a lot of prerequisites. So they start off with, from what I remember, you would go to a precinct, and they had what was called police applicant investigation unit, and you would basically hand over your life, your birth certificate, write down every place you lived. My investigator absolutely despised me because I was catch me if you can. I would get bored at a job and do something else. Like when I got out of high school, my father's like, "Great, you want to be a cop? You got 2 or 3 years to go. You got to work." I was like, "No problem." But like, I would leave the house working for a supermarket and then come home later that day as an exterminator. Like my father wanted, I lied my way into an exterminating company. There was an ad, and I just told them, they said, "Do you have experience?" "Oh, yeah, I worked at such and such." "Oh, okay." I'm going out spraying and stuff. And the guy liked me and he couldn't figure out why the other guy got rid of me. So he called the other guy and he goes, "I have no idea who you're talking about." So one day after work, I come in and he's got this long face and he goes, "Come here." He goes, "I just called Frank over at whatever exterminating company." He goes, "He's never heard of you. Who are you?" And I was like, "Oh, you're going to fire me now?" And he goes, "Vic, I got you out spraying poison and stuff." I go, "Well, come on, it's not that difficult." So I got like a half-hour training seminar and I went back to exterminating. But I had a lot of different jobs, and my investigator hated me because she had to go to all those jobs and find out, how was I? What kind of employee was I? Was I fired for stealing? Was there any problems with this kid? But did that. Then the psychological, that's funny. So the NYPD, they would run you through a battery of psychological exams. And I remember, and it was all done in one day. It was like 8 hours of psychologicals. And I remember one of them was you had to draw a man, a house, and a tree. Now I can't draw worth a lick. And I'm saying to myself, they're going to think I'm Charles Manson. Like I can't draw. My brother is gifted like that. I can't draw. So I remember my friend who got hired a year before me goes, "Draw a happy man, a big happy man, draw a house, no locks on the door, a lot of windows, and draw a big tree." So I do all these things, right? A couple of weeks later, I get called down to Left Rack Plaza, which was our health service division. I'm in a room with 30 other people in their 20s. And I try to get a seat where the psychiatrist or psychologist was so I could listen in. And they're calling them in. And then finally, the kid before me, it kind of quieted down. I was the second to last. And I remember the psychologist talking about the kid before me, and they go, "Look how he has no self-esteem. Look how small his man is." I'm like, "Yeah," because I drew like this big guy with a shit-eating grin. So anyway, got past the psychological, physical exam, drug screening. And then what happens is back then there were three departments, housing, transit, and then the NYPD was the same test. You got a letter to go down someplace in Manhattan, and they had this big board with your names. And I really did. I just wanted to get my foot in the door. I wanted to go NYPD, but I was just happy to get accepted, get my foot in the door. And when I saw NYPD, this is great, and I went into the academy.
No prior police experience, no prior military. You were in the academy. How old are you?
21.
21. Is it a shock? I'm assuming it's kind of militaristic as they're running you through this.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of like Catholic high school. There were rules. I mean, they couldn't, smack you, but like they did in Catholic high school. But I, you know, I am not anti-authority, but I pretty much get something if you tell me something. I don't do well when people could just keep doing that. So I didn't particularly like the police academy. What I found interesting about the police academy was, like, at first you go in there and you don't know what's going on. They're running you to different classrooms, and the gym was a joke. It's not like I was a Navy SEAL before I went into the police academy. I worked at a supermarket, but I was in pretty good shape. I didn't find the physical aspect all that challenging. But what I realized was the people in the academy had like 3, 4 years on the job, and they were all studying for the sergeant's exam. So it's kind of difficult to take someone seriously that's giving you the rules and regulations when they never did the street time or put anything that they're telling you to practicality.
Yeah. You finish the academy.
Mhm.
Is there somewhere that you want to go?
I wanted to go to I wanted to stay in the Bronx. I
Okay.
was a Bronx kid,
Okay.
and I wanted to go to a South Bronx precinct. And
Okay.
they say, be careful what you wish for, you just might get it. I go to what's called field training, NSU 7, Neighborhood Stabilization Unit 7. It was turned out of the 4A precinct in the Bronx, and I loved it. Um, it's baptism by fire. You're in a group with 30 other rookies, and they sprinkle you on foot posts throughout the South Bronx in a zone. So my NSU covered 3 or 4 precincts. And one day, I remember, like, one of my first days, I'm on Fulton Avenue in the South Bronx. It's just rows of burnt out abandoned buildings, and they dropped me off. I felt like I was from outer space. I'm like, people are coming up to me, talking to me in Spanish. I'm like, what did I get myself involved in? And every week or two, you would get in a car with another rookie and the sergeant and answer calls. And I like, this is great. I'm going to race around, and this is going to be like Hill Street Blues. Well, the sergeants, they're, we're responding to every shitty call, DOAs, car accidents, because they want you to learn these things, because you're going to a precinct in 6 months. And we'll go into that, how an NYPD precinct for a rookie isn't really all that friendly. They want you to have this experience so you're not just kind of standing around with your thumb up your ass, like, what did I get myself involved in?
Mm-hmm.
Field training I found very interesting, and the training sergeants I had were really good.
Give me a take on NYPD. When you first start, you're on foot patrol. I think that would be not only invaluable for community standpoint, but you're learning how to talk to people because
Yes.
I'm assuming people are coming up
Oh,
to you
all
all
the
the time,
time.
right? And they still do that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's for a variety of reasons. Like, say you get a foot post in a business district.
Mm-hmm.
You got the store owners that want to buddy up with you in case they want to know where you are, in case someone comes in causing a ruckus or shoplifting. You get the old man that just wants to chat, and then you got people coming up to you with their problems. And you can't hide. When you're in a radio car, guys will pretend they don't see something and hook a left when
Mm-hmm.
someone's trying to flag them down. You got a foot post. That's not an option. People are in your face and they're coming up to you. Another great thing about a foot post is you learn the radio a lot faster,
Really? Why?
because when you're in a radio call, you're being directed to somewhere. So you're listening for your name at all times. When you're on a foot post, you have the luxury of listening to the different calls and how the guys talk back. It's almost like once you get in that radio car, you're in the cockpit, and now you're waiting for them to send you someplace. With the foot post, you can listen to what's going on in the next, because on an NYPD radio frequencies, there's 3 or 4 precincts on one frequency.
Hmm.
So you're listening to calls and car chases, and people being directed, and how to talk on there. That's an art. It's an art to know how to talk on the radio, and it's an art to listen to the radio.
Are you by yourself when you first, like you're talking about your field training and stuff? You're not by yourself in the beginning, right?
Sometimes, most of the time, they would have what's called adjourning posts. So if you and we would get Arthur Avenue from Belmont to East 187th Street. You would have the south side of the street. I would have the north side of the street. And your sergeants didn't care if you talked and went on calls together. But every NYPD borough has what's called a shoe fly. A shoe fly is a captain with no home. They're usually not politically connected, and their job is to drive around the borough and catch cops with their pants down, off post, no hat, getting something to eat when they shouldn't, getting a haircut, white socks. It's just they nitpick. It's a shoe fly. They just kind of fly around and they break balls. So it's not that you had a partner on foot, but there would usually be a foot post, but sometimes there wasn't. Sometimes you were out on an island by yourself.
Okay, so let's talk about maybe the first time that you were out by yourself. You're 21 years old. You know, you're doing your foot patrol. Are you scared at all? What
Yeah. Yeah, because of course, because I thought, you think I thought it was going to be like the movies, and it's not like the movies. And yeah, I got a gun, and yeah, I got a nightstick, and but I'm by myself. People are coming up to me. I don't know how to use this radio yet. Just that it was minimum radio training, and the radio's jumping off, and is that me? And then cops are rolling up on you. Did you just hear a call 2 blocks away? No. Go answer that. Okay. Like I said, they're not really friendly to the rookies.
Mhm.
So, oh no, it was definitely. I remember having this angst the first couple of weeks until I started figuring it out somewhat. Like, did I make the right career choice? But I said to myself, I put all my eggs in one basket. I'm getting out of this. Like I'm going to see this through. But yeah, oh no, definitely. I was a nervous wreck like the first couple of weeks.
You get to your first precinct. Where is that?
So after field training, that's when the politicking begins. So out of my NSU, there's 30 cops. And some of the guys had, as John Ciassi said, a hook. A hook is someone that can get you to a desired place. Some people have cranes. Cranes actually put you wherever, right? And there were guys going to all these different precincts and stuff. And I didn't know anybody. My father was a butcher. So I went to a South Bronx precinct, but it was a burnt out hellhole called the 4-2 precinct in the South Bronx. They filmed the movie Fort Apache, the Bronx. But by the time I got there, it was just all abandoned buildings and crackheads.
I- and I did a 3-part episode with Ralph Friedman. He was actually in that. I'm pretty sure it was the same
4-1. He was a 4-1 guy.
4-1. Okay, so but at the time when you get there, obviously he's telling me it's crazy. It's the 70s and everything else. How is it for you? Is there crime rampant going on at the time at that
Yeah,
precinct?
but it's not like the 4-4 or the 4-6. You're not answering 30 calls a night, but it's an impoverished neighborhood. There are no real functioning businesses, a couple of liquor stores, a couple of check cashing places, like a couple of pizza places, but like there were no corporate anythings in there.
Yeah.
It was just it was barren. And you were in the throes of the crack epidemic. I mean, I tell the story, and it's true. I came in. I was never forget. It was a Sunday on a morning shift, and when I came in to go to my locker, there was a female crackhead in a nightgown in front of the desk, just yelling and screaming. So I went upstairs. I got dressed. 5 minutes later, I come downstairs. She's still at the desk screaming. So the desk officer, was calling the general, he goes, Ferrari and whoever I was working with, he goes, remove her from the station house because we're not getting anywhere with her. She's kicking and screaming. So we escort her out. And about an hour or two later, I'm in a radio car, and me and that guy that escorted her out just happened to be working together that day. I think he was a rookie. We get sent to the hospital for a gunshot wound. So anybody that receives a gunshot wound, the hospital calls the police. We get there. It's the same crackhead. She had a bullet hole in her calf, but she was so out of it. She got shot with like a 25, so there's no real blood or anything. And she was walking around pretty good. And we walk in, and she's like, "Those are the 2 cops that just threw me out of the station house, and I was trying to report this gunshot wound." And the doctor's looking at us like, so I mean, there was just crazy stuff like that happening all the time.
Yeah. So how I'm assuming you got a whole bunch of support from the old guys. They taught you how to do the job.
The 4-2 was a dumping ground. So it was either rookies, people like me, that had no clout, that just got drafted there. And then you had guys that screwed up in other places and they got dumped and they were miserable and they were never getting out of there. They screwed up for whatever, domestic violence, something the job couldn't quite fire them for, and dump them in there. And, occasionally you get in a radio call with those guys and they would tell you, don't touch the radio and I'm driving.
Mm.
Okay. And that was it. I remember working with guys on a Sunday one time. I'll never forget on a Sunday. We pulled down an abandoned street. The guy turned off his radio. He told me to lower mine. And he had like the old days, the Sunday paper was about this thick. And we sat there and he read the newspaper for like an hour. And I'm like, I'm just sitting there sweating like the sergeant's going to come. But back then, nobody cared. You know what I mean? It wasn't like it is now. But the old timers, they had, when you're a rookie cop in an NYPD precinct, at least then, no one's going to talk to you. They don't know if you're a problem, you're a snitch, you're a tattletale, you're a know-it-all, who your hook is. So it's best just to keep your ears open, your mouth shut, and just don't get involved in anything you shouldn't be. And that happens to rookies. I saw that happen where rookies would follow a guy off a cliff because they're new and they want to impress people, and they go right off the cliff. They do something ridiculous that costs them their job, and they might even go to jail for it. So I just kind of straddled that fence and I kept my mouth shut, and just, I'd get barked at by the old timers. I wouldn't say a word. I took it.
So if the old guys aren't teaching you how to do the job, how are you learning the job?
You hope every now and then there's someone that's kind that'll take pity on you, and there were those guys from time to time. What was worse than the old timers that could be really nasty? The guys that had a year or two more than you. We used to call them hairbags. And a hairbag is this cop with uniform deficiencies. They're salty. They talk out of the side of their mouth. Oh, what are you doing that for? It's the guy that's going to stay in the precinct for 20 years and drive around in circles. You would get these kids that had a year or two and they thought they were hairbags. So their way of feeling puffed up was to shit on the guy that had a year less. So some of those guys would treat you worse than the old timers.
How about the political nature of the NYPD? You're talking about the shoe flies that are going around because they don't really have any hooks or anything else, and just hooks in general. But how political is the NYPD in terms of?
You find that out later.
Okay.
When you're a rookie, you're an amoeba. You don't know anything. You just kind of feeling your way in the landscape. As you're on the job and you're meeting people and you work with guys that are going up the ladder, and you start learning, you're getting called to meetings. And later when I was a detective, and then it's kind of like a behind the scenes tour of Disney World, how the place works. That's when you start like, oh, okay, that's why this is, that's why that is. But that takes years to develop if you don't have family in the department. Like I said, I didn't have family in the department.
So without family in the department, for you, is it getting to know the right people that are going to kind of put their arms around you and take care of you then?
If you want to go any place, but for me, it was always, I love the work. I love making arrests. I love getting into foot chases. I love getting into car chases. I like locking up the bad guy. I like doing my job. And I always felt that if I just kept my nose to the grindstone and just kept plugging away, that was my father's logic, at least. He always used to say, don't worry about anything else. Just put in the work.
Yeah.
Just do the work.
When you first started, was there a goal that you wanted to get to? Was it homicide, or no, I just want to do the job and we'll figure it out as we go?
No, I always wanted to be a New York City police detective. I didn't know where I wanted to work, but eventually, after a couple of years in, and every cop finds their niche, I was a car guy. I was always getting into car chases. So I wanted to go to the auto crime division.
Okay. All right. So before we start talking about that, there were some interesting stories in your book. Can you tell me the story about some EDPs, and what does EDP stand for?
So EDP and NYPD verbiage is an emotionally disturbed person.
Okay.
And you come across them all the time. But every NYPD precinct has EDPs. They do. They're like mascots. They hang around the precinct. And for the most part, they got no place to go. They're either homeless or they're living with family, and they'll hang around the precinct. And every one of them has their own act. So like when I first got to the 4-2, my first day in the 4-2, I'm walking into the precinct with my uniforms over my shoulder. And this little bald Spanish guy comes running up to me in a boxer stance. And he had a voice like you could sand your floor with his voice. And he's like, I am the macho man. He thought he was Macho Camacho. I have the power. I'll teach you how to box. And I'm like, get out of my face. And then I was like, I'm going to put my uniform down because I'm going to punch him. And one of the old times said, no. He watches our cars, that no one breaks into our cars. He goes, he's all right. And he used to hang around the precinct. and the Macho Man, and he would, pretend to teach cops how to box. One time at roll call in the midnights, they gave him a uniform without the gun and marched him into roll call, and the desk officer had a shit fit. Every precinct's got a couple of guys or women. When I worked in the 50th precinct, we had a guy. He looked like uh, Nick Tortelli from Cheers, Carla's husband, that guy Dan Hedaya with the hairy chest. He would come into the precinct dressed like an attorney with a satchel. He'd get your name and type your name on legal briefs that you killed his wife and serve you with these bogus subpoenas. We'd throw him out of the station house. Then you had a woman that would hang around the precinct. She had Coke bottle glasses, and she would have this big shit-eating grin, and you had to get away from her because she would get you in a bear hug and scream, "Policeman, I love the policeman." So what we would do with the rookie cops is we would say, "Come here, I want you to meet somebody," and shove them into her. The woman had like a grip like a sumo wrestler, and like, what the fuck? And she's like, "I love the policeman." So every NYPD precinct had, and I worked in a lot of different precincts, so you would know their act. It was almost like a comedy. It was like a variety show. Some of the precincts.
How about the story about dumping one of the EDPs on another department?
So the 50th precinct in the Bronx, I worked there later, is northern precinct in the Bronx. It borders the Yonkers border. And what I started to realize is on streets like Broadway and Riverdale Avenue, you would see a Yonkers police car go racing past you into Yonkers, and you're like, I didn't hear them over the radio putting over a chase or something. And then you'd find some lunatic causing havoc, and like, the cops dumped me off here and blah blah. Like, oh, they're dumping their garbage in the Would you like a ride back to Yonkers? Get in. So the story you're talking about, it was cold. It was a 4 to 12. We get called to this nice building in the north end of the precinct, and this guy is in a hallway and he's ringing everybody's buzzer to get in. And he doesn't know anybody in the building, and he's drunk. And I go, "Where do you live?" And he lives at the south end of the precinct. For the life of me, I don't know how he got up there. And I said, "Do you want me to give you a ride home? Please, please, please." So we toss him, make sure he doesn't have a weapon. We put him in the car. And then, in addition to being drunk, he's crazy. He's telling us that his wife won $20 million in the lottery and she's controlling us. And, you know, we get to his place and he's not getting out of the car. And we try getting him out of the car, and it's like, yeah, I don't want to call the sergeant and tase this guy, but I don't want to drive around the whole night with him either, right? So I says, I know what we're going to do. So what we did was we took him up over the border back to where we found him in Yonkers. I figured maybe he doesn't live here. Maybe he lives in Yonkers. So I pretended like I had a flat tire, and my partner and I got out, and I said, "Poppy, can you give us a hand?" And as soon as he got out of the car to help us with the flat tire, we ran around, got in the car, and drove off and left him back in Yonkers.
Okay, so NYPD reminds me a lot of the military just because you guys are so big, but you're so diverse. So
Yeah.
you're dealing with all sorts of different nationalities and races and creeds and everything else. Tell me about your partner Bok Choy.
So I've worked with guys from a lot of different ethnicities. I worked on a case where they were shipping cars to China. So the auto crime division reached into the NYPD's vast pool of cops, and we found cops that spoke Mandarin and Cantonese to man the wiretaps. After the case, Bok Choy was my partner for a while, and Bok Choy was 6'5", 300 pounds, and he was a patrol guy. He didn't have car experience. He wasn't a detective yet. So I was working with him. And the thing about Bok Choy was he spoke all these different dialects. So I remember one time we're walking through Chinatown. So the Manhattan Criminal Court is lower Manhattan near Chinatown. So we would park and cut through Chinatown. And one time I see two Chinese guys in a heated argument. I go, "Bok Choy, what are they talking about?" And he goes, "Oh, that one over there, he late for work. Last warning." Oh, another time we're cutting through Chinatown. Two women are arguing. What are they talking about? "Oh, that one, she pays too much attention to her husband. Not good." So the third time I ask, he goes, "What the fuck am I, your spy?" He goes, "Go buy Rosetta Stone." So it was like a comedy routine with him.
Did he have a nickname for you though?
Yeah, he used to call me Lo Fan, which I think means evil white ghost. Which I'm half Italian. I think I'm olive skin, but to him I was evil white goat.
Okay, can you tell me about the 5 kilo arrest you made in uniform?
Yeah, it was the early '90s. I was on patrol doing day shift, and we had a whole bunch of cab robberies going on in the precinct. And NYPD precincts towards the end of the tour, you want to get as close to the precinct as possible, and you can't go in early. If there's a shoe fly, you get a command discipline. So cops circle the precinct like buzzards. It's like LaGuardia Airport during the holidays. Like you got all these police cars crisscrossing, right? So my partner and I are just waiting, looking at the watch, waiting for the tour to go in. And I see a cab pass by with a bunch of young guys in the back. And one of them is leaning over the front with his head right next to the cab driver. And I told the guy I'm working with, I'll go, he was driving. I go, I think that cab's getting robbed. So we start following it. And as soon as we start following the cab, it starts burning lights. So we put on our emergency lights, pull the cab over, and run up on the car. And in the back seat, you got these three guys with a shopping bag. And the shopping bag is like a hot potato. And the bag rips, and I see a kilo. And I thought I was on candid camera, like I was waiting for Alan Funt to come out. We open the door, 4 or 5 kilos, 3 hombres, cuff them up, bring them back to the precinct. I'm on top of the world. I feel like I won the Stanley Cup. I'm walking around with the kilos. People are taking, you worked in the DEA, you know how that's a big deal. Taking photos of it. Guys are blowing smoke up my ass. You're going to go to the narcotics division, like, right? So in the NYPD, when you make a summary arrest like that, it's not a case arrest, it's just stumbled upon it. That night, you have to go to the courthouse and draw up the arrest. So the coke goes to the lab. Someone takes the prisoners down to central booking. I go down to the Bronx courthouse to write up the arrest. It's dead of winter, and the neighborhood around the Bronx courthouse is rough. And around 5 p.m., after that judge bangs that gavel, it's like a ghost town. There was like one diner. I didn't like it. But across the street from the Bronx courthouse, they had just opened up this new food court. It was like a bunch of stores. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to treat myself. So I'm in uniform, about 7, 8 o'clock at night. I go in there. I order veal parm, spaghetti. I'm sitting there. I'm eating. I've always had problems with my stomach. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh, I got to go. Can't go to the courthouse bathroom because it's a dungeon. But the food court, it's probably like a cathedral in there. Like no one's even used the bathroom, right? So I go into the bathroom. It's clean. I go into the stall. I take off my gun belt. I hang it on the hook. I drop my pants and I'm getting ready for liftoff. While I'm sitting there, I hear the bathroom door kick open and I hear teenagers. And they're screaming and hitting the hand dryers and turning on the sinks. And I'm like, oh, shit. Like, yeah, I'm in uniform. I'm a New York City cop. Quite vulnerable here. Then it gets quiet. And I go, did they leave? Did they see the legs on them? Now it's weird. Like it went from pandemonium to now it's quiet. I said, I better get dressed. And I lean forward to grab my pants. And I look up and a kid went into the next stall, jumped on the toilet, and he's reaching over to grab my gun belt. And I went, oh shit. So I jump up and with my left, try to pull up my pants. And with my right, I grab him by the neck and I pull him. But when I pull him, I put him closer to the gun belt and he grabs it. So I'm like, oh shit. So now I drop my pants and it's a hockey fight. I'm just hitting him with my left. His friends run into the next stall. They're pulling his legs. Finally, I get him to let go of the gun belt. It hits the floor and that metal wall, like it's aluminum, it bends, it bucked over, right? They run out, pull up my pants, put on my gun belt, go charging outside. There's like a 300-pound porter buffing the floor. I go, Poppy, Poppy. Takes his Walkman out. I go, did you see like a bunch of teenagers run out of here? He goes, no. So I got my radio in my hand and I'm like, do I get on the radio and call a 1013 and give a description and try to catch these kids? But if I do that, I'm going to be the laughing stock of the Bronx. Like every time I go to court, they're going to like, you see that guy over there? I ate it. And I hadn't told that story until I got into writing, but I didn't tell a soul until I started writing books because it was just too embarrassing. But it was too good of a story not to put in one of my books.
Yeah.
But I went from locking up 3 guys with 4 or 5 keys to almost losing my gun belt the same night.
Wow. Wow. What's your first assignment once you get out of uniform? What's your first assignment?
Well, in the precinct, I worked at an anti-crime unit, so you're not undercover, but you're driving around the precinct in an unmarked car. It gives you that extra couple of seconds to sneak up on the bad guy.
Plain clothes though?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I did that. Making a lot of arrests. Everybody starts telling me, "You got to put in for narcotics. You got to put in for narcotics." I put in for narcotics. I worked in the Manhattan North Narcotics Division from '93 to '94. It was exciting. There was a lot of running around, but it's kind of like McDonald's of food. It's mass arrests. You're locking up 10, 15 people a day. Yeah, there's street people. You're not locking up kingpins right away. I remember I always had a cold in narcotics because they're coughing. These people live outside. They're homeless. They're slinging crack. They're working to keep their habit going. I always had a cold. You were always afraid of getting stuck with a needle. Always. And all those cases always went to court because sale, even for one vial of crack to an undercover, is punishable by a year and a half to 3.
Mm.
So people go to jail for this. I mean, even in, they take it seriously. So I was either in court doing buy and bust, doing a search warrant. There was no time to catch up on paperwork or anything. It just wasn't for me. So I went back to patrol, which is unusual. Was in a precinct for a while, and then I got back into the car angle again, and then I went to the auto crime division.
Do you have any insight? You're talking about doing drug cases and people going to jail, and you're talking about arrests and stuff like that. And maybe this happened after you left, but do you have any sense of when kind of things kind of turned in New York? Because Giuliani was running the show.
Yeah.
When did it kind of turn for the worse?
You mean for the better or for the worse?
Well, maybe it was
It was
bad,
bad. Yeah,
and then
no,
it
it
got
was
good, but then it's kind of
well,
sketchy right
right.
now.
Yeah. Well, when I got hired,
Okay.
it was the circus. Giuliani came in 91, 90, in the early 90s. And what he did was, when I first got hired, every borough had a narcotics unit. There's only like 30 people in it. Giuliani came along and says, "We're getting these street people off," because they realized that the very people that are selling drugs and buying drugs, are the same people breaking into your car.
Hmm.
They're robbing people in the subway to keep the habit going. So we got to get these people off the playing field. And a lot of these people carry no identification. Don't give them a summons, run them through the system. And guess what? This guy's prince comes back for 5 burglaries. This guy was wanted for a homicide 3 years ago. So it's pulling people off the playing field. So Giuliani, I'm a fan of Giuliani's. He came in the early '90s and was there until 9/11, a little after 2001, and then Mike Bloomberg came in. Bloomberg was smart enough to keep the same model, and NYPD continued to thrive. It was good until I retired, and then it changed. It took a turn for a worse. I don't know. I don't know exactly when. I've been out of New York since 2008, but I know after Bloomberg, it took a turn for the worse.
Do you think it was De Blasio that was probably the
Oh yeah,
catalyst of all of
De
it?
Blasio and some of the district attorney's offices with this no bail reform nonsense.
Yeah, I don't understand not arresting. I mean, it just seems like a turnstile. You're picking
We
up
are
people.
arresting them. You're just
Yeah,
letting them go with
yeah,
no bail.
yeah, yeah. That's it seems crazy to me. Okay, tell me about the two nuns steal a car.
So it's the early '90s. It was a Saturday. My partner and I are driving around the precinct. We're in uniform, and two nuns in their outfits, the habits, the whole 9 yards, are on Broadway, and they flag us down. And they were younger, and I thought it was a sorority prank because in our precinct we had Manhattan College and the College of Mount St. Vincent. And to get into these fraternities and sororities, they were always doing stupid shit. So I was very skeptical. So we pull up and they're upset. And basically, Mother Superior, they were in a convent or a nunnery up in Westchester County. Mother Superior was away for the weekend. These two young nuns got the keys to her car, came to the Bronx, parked in an Italian restaurant, and went shopping down Broadway. And it was one of those places where there's a sign: if you park 15 minutes longer and don't eat at Anthony's, we're going to tow your car. But they're nuns. The Anthony's had their car towed. So they're crying, and I finally believe them. And I says, "All right, come on, get in the car." So they get in the car, and she's like, "Mother Superior's going to be very upset." I'm like, okay. So we go to the tow yard, and I am not a fan of people that owe towing companies. Actually, we went into that. I had to park to film it. And it's a tow yard. There's a trailer in the middle of the yard. It's fenced in, so I start hitting the siren. This big guy comes walking out with his fly open, eating a slice of pizza. He comes up to the gate and I go, did you just tow these two nuns' cars? He goes, well, I didn't know they were nuns, but yeah. Said, come on, bro. Let their car out. He goes, $100. I said, all right. So this is before ATMs and stuff. I didn't have an ATM. The nuns had no way of getting $100. I went into the precinct. I had money in my locker. A couple of the other cops kicked in, gave her $100. She goes, I'll pay you back. And I'm like, no, it's all right. She goes, no, I want to pay you back. Please give me your phone number. I'm like, okay. Now, you know how it is. When you lend anybody money, it's a pain in the ass to get it back. So I'm early 20s. I'm still living at home and pre-cell phone. My father's a smart ass. And I come home one day and he goes, Sister Samantha called. I said, okay. Get the number. He goes, Sister Samantha. I go, Dad, she's a nun. She's not black. Like he thought it was like a Motown group. And I go, he goes, I don't care who you date. Wait, a nun? A nun's calling the house? Why? Like my father's very Catholic, right? And so I was like, just. So anyway, I call the convent. I get this nun on the phone. And it was like a friggin' spy movie. Like I couldn't go to the convent. So I had to go to this park, sit on a bench with ducks. And then like she came, walked away, came over, sat next to me. She gave me an envelope with $100. And I said, I said, you're young. I said, you sure about this? Like the choice you made? And she goes, yeah. Are you? With your choice? I go, yeah, I'm good. I kept in touch with her for a short time. And then I don't know what, I should look up whatever happened to her. I'm sure I have her name written somewhere in one of my memo books if I still even have it. But yeah, two nuns stole Mother Superior's car, got it towed, and I had to get it back for them.
Okay, tell me about your route to auto crimes. So you said you kind of had this specialty about cars. How do you end up getting there?
Well, in my precinct years, I was always getting into car chases. I grew up in a neighborhood where stealing a car was a rite of passage. I was not a car thief, but a lot of the guys in my neighborhood were. Then I worked in a gas station as a teenager, and guys would come through with stolen cars, trying to sell parts on the car. Can you fix the car? I knew what to look for. In the old days with like the General Motors products, you break the steering column, vent windows broken, the balloon tire changed, dirty plates on a clean car. So I knew what to look for. And I was in, and the NYPD had just started going with the computer cars. So it was like a slot machine. And if you knew what to look for and you knew the odds, it increased your odds of getting a hit on a stolen car. And I was getting involved in a lot of car chases. The NYPD policy on stolen car chases is you're not allowed to chase stolen cars. Did we do it? Yeah, all the time. But if you got into a car chase and nobody got hurt and no cars got crashed, no harm, no foul. No one's going to say a word. If you got into a car chase and you wrecked a radio car or, God forbid, a civilian got hurt, they're going to look to take your job. They're going to hurt you. So there was this new sergeant in the precinct who came up to me one day, and he was a young, energetic guy, and he goes, I like what you're doing. He says, but you're going to get screwed. He goes, there's another way. Another way for what? And he goes, do you know what a tag job is, changing VIN numbers on car? And I said, I had heard of it, but I didn't know what it was. And whenever there was an abandoned car in the street, he would show me where the hidden VIN numbers were and stuff and what to look for. And the guy became my mentor. And I started making all these tag job arrests. And, you pull over these gypsy cabs. Gypsy cab is a four-door car, usually driven by an illegal alien with no license, no registration, no insurance. They used to cruise the bus stops and the subway train stops. And it's called like a dollar cab. So people would give them a couple of bucks and they would take them home from whatever train station. The problem with that is if they get into an accident, they're going to leave the car and you're screwed. So a lot of those cars were tagged. They would have someone steal a car and change the VIN numbers on it, and they would drive it into the ground. So that guy was like my mentor. And at the time, the catalyst for me going to the auto crime division was the auto crime division had a school. It was a week-long school where NYPD members from different precincts could go. And everybody wanted to go to that school because later on, to become a sergeant, you needed X amount of college credits. I forget what it was. That week-long class at the auto crime division was 4 college credits. So everybody wanted to go to that school. I wanted to go to it. I had no intention of being a sergeant, but I wanted that knowledge or maybe to go to auto crime. So I'm sitting in this classroom and there's cops and detectives from all over the city. And about the second day, this salty hairbag detective goes, "Is there anybody in this room that wants to work in the auto crime division?" Again, I raise my hand. He goes, "Officer, stand up." And I knew it. I knew it. I stepped out too far, and I stand up, and he goes, "Do you have any family on the job above the rank of inspector?" I said, "No." He goes, "Sit down. You're never going to work here." And I'm like, "Oh, yeah? Fuck this guy. I'm getting in one way or another." And I just kept my nose to the grindstone. I kept making arrests. From the precinct level, I went into the borough water larceny unit, which you had the run of the borough to go after car thieves. I started doing that. My old sergeant from Narcotics, it was just kind of the stars aligned. My sergeant from Narcotics, who liked me, was in auto crime. And he saw me one day and he goes, "What are you doing now?" I said, "I'm in borough water larceny." He goes, "Put in for auto crime." He goes, "I'll put in a good word for you." I go, "Are you serious?" He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "What are you going to do? Work in the borough for the rest of your life?" He goes, "Do it." Had the interview, did well on the interview, and the rest is history. I went into the auto crime division where I did my next 10 years.
So when you're in the auto, when you as soon as you get in the auto crime, is that when you become a detective, or is that later on?
No, that's later on, but I kind of I did 12 or 14 months in narcotics, so I had that investigative time. So to get your detective shield, you have to work in an investigative unit. It used to be 28 months, and then I think they changed it to 18 months. I don't know what it is now, but I had X amount of months in narcotics banked. So I only needed a couple of months in the auto crime division, which blew people's minds. Like, how is this guy a detective already? But I had already banked that time from the narcotics division.
I'm curious, because I don't know where you ended up here. So, and hopefully I'm getting this right. So you start off as a third grade detective, is
Yeah.
that right? What it is, and then second, and then first. So what did you retire as?
Oh, I was a third grader. I had no hook.
Okay.
So the only way you're going to get second and first grade is, and let me go on record here because I know a lot of guys watch it. I think precinct detectives should get that above guys in specialized units because they're doing God's work. Those poor guys in detective squads are so overworked. They got to go to CompStat or they're involved with the CompStat nonsense. They handle everything from bounce checks to domestic violence to robberies to homicides. They're overworked, underpaid. They're doing constant different tour change. I think that those guys or guys in Bronx homicide or homicide units or robbery units, but in specialized units like the auto crime division or OCCB, the Organized Crime Control Bureau, which covers vice, auto crime, OCID, the units that really go after the mafia, there are slots allotted
Mm-hmm.
for second grade, first grade. And as my lieutenant used to say to me, what happens is if you're recognized by your commanding officer, you have to do a 49. They make you do it, spelling out how wonderful you are or your arrest or the case. And you got to do this thing every year. It's called being put on the grid. And then you have to do this. It gets scrutinized, right? They submit it, and then maybe you get tapped or maybe you don't. My lieutenant used to tell me this all the time. He goes, "Vic," he goes, "I'm proud of you. You're on the grid. You're never going to get promoted." I said, "Why?" He goes, "You've been invited to the dance. Now you got to get picked." He goes, "You don't join fraternal organizations and you don't work well with others." He goes, "You're never going to go." That's fine with me. I says, I enjoyed what I did. If I got second or first grade, great. But I have no regrets with my career. There's a
Yeah.
lot of guys it's fool's gold, that grade thing, because there are guys that get it. Should they have gotten it? I don't know. Guys at administrative positions and they put in for it and they get it. And then you got guys that are breaking their ass that don't get it. And some guys retire. It's like fool's gold. They're very bitter. And it's like, I didn't get it.
Yeah.
I wasn't valedictorian in high school either. So
Is it with each one of those grades? Is it a bump in pay
yeah.
though, or okay?
Oh,
Oh,
yeah. So as a detective, if you get second grade, you're making sergeant's pay.
ah,
If you're a first grader, you're making lieutenant's pay.
okay, okay,
It's a lot of money.
yeah. And so you never decide. Well, let me ask you this: why didn't you ever decide to like promote?
It was too late in my career.
Okay,
By the time I got tapped, I had maybe 2 or 3 years left.
okay.
I was too busy making overtime and just, I was at that stage in my life. I was fairly certain I was getting out at 20.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there were guys, if you hang in there and you're on the grid, you'll eventually get it. I wasn't hanging around
Yeah.
any longer than I had to.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me what kind of crimes. Well, obviously you're in auto crime, but when I talked to Stiasny, he said you guys cover everything. Basically, auto crime is you guys are into everything. So what are you in particular covering?
I did search warrants. I would pick off the garden variety car thieves, the pains in the asses. I worked on shipping cases with guys shipping stolen cars out of the country, guys changing VIN numbers on cars for resale. Uh, I got a couple of stories where we were hooked in with different dealerships because directors of security would call us when there was a problem. So late in my career, I get a phone call from the director of security for Mercedes Benz. And he says, I've got a mystery and I don't know what it is. I go, well, what is it? He goes, a guy brings a car in for something, this Mercedes high end. And he says, we plug it into the computer and it says that this car was manufactured to be in France. So they call Deutschland and they say, that car, it's amazing how Germans keep records. They go, in Germany, they say, yes, that car was manufactured to be in France, but it was taken in a home invasion. I said, you got to be kidding me. He goes, I don't know what to make of this. I go, well, give me the plate. So I run the plate, nothing. I run the plate, 50 states, nothing. So either they got the wrong plate or it was a temporary. And I said, do you got this guy's information? He goes, yeah. I go, can you lure him back? Tell him to give him a free air freshener. He goes, yeah, I'll get him back in here. Gives me the plate. So my partner and I, a couple of days later, get up bright and early. And in Manhattan, there's no parking. So the cars line up along the dealership to go in first thing in the morning. So we're sitting on West 50 something street and I see the car and it's diplomatic plates. Now that changes things because we're not supposed to screw around with diplomats because they have diplomatic immunity. So I watch the car go into the dealership. My partner and I get out. We're watching this guy. And the guy looked like the drummer for U2, that Adam Clayton. Like he had the rim glasses with the skinny jeans, weighed 145 pounds. He's like in his late 40s, early 50s with this hot chick in a chinchilla coat, and she looks like she's going to give birth in 15 minutes. And they're perusing around. You could tell it's money. She wouldn't be with them otherwise. And they leave. So I go to the car. I write down everything and I says, listen, I can't just take this car. I said, I got to make some phone calls, but now I have his information. I got everything, right? So I call up the State Department and they go, I says, I'm going to steal this car. I can't lock him up. I can't really question him, but I'm going to steal his car. And they go, no, please don't do that. They go, we're going to work on this. Give us some time. We'll try to get the diplomat that has this car in. I said, all right. So in the meantime, this is after 9/11. So the NYPD had detectives in other countries working on terrorism, gathering intelligence. So we had a sergeant working in France. So now I'm working with a time zone thing and the one phone in our office that can dial international. I get the sergeant in France and I says, listen, this is what I need from you. Get a police report and find out, is this thing really stolen? If it is, find out through the insurance company, does the insurance company own this car or who owns this car now? Does the insurance company want it back? What's the story with this? He said, okay. He gets back to me a week or two later, goes, it's stolen. It was taken in a home invasion in France like 2-3 years ago and it vanished. I find out through the State Department, to follow this, the car's stolen in France. The car was shipped into the United States in an international shipping container from a country in Africa called Cote d'Ivoire. How the car in France wound up in Cote d'Ivoire, we'll never know. Cote d'Ivoire is a volatile place. It was shipped in an international shipping container from the country of Vanuatu, which is an island in the South Pacific where they did a Survivor episode. The diplomat from Vanuatu is married to a British citizen. So I go to meet the guy with the State Department. He shows me a picture of the female diplomat. And I go, that's not the woman I saw in the car dealership, but that's the guy. That's her husband. I go, does he have diplomatic immunity? Because I wanted to lock his ass up. He goes, yes, he does. You can't lock him up. So I says, well, what are we going to do? He says, there's like 2 diplomats from Vanuatu. He goes, chances are she's not going to want to lose her gig. He goes, I'm going to call her up. I'm going to explain to her. He goes, chances are she's just going to hand you the car. I said, like that? He goes, like that. Because probably they're going to mess with her. So we set up a meeting. I show up at the State Department. This female diplomat is there. Couldn't have been nicer. Hands me the keys. I asked her about a husband. Conveniently, he was out of the country on business. She doesn't really know how he acquired the car. This has to be a big mistake. She's so sorry. Gives me the keys. No questions asked. Like, if I was taking your $80,000 Mercedes, you're like, do I get a receipt? Like, take it.
Yeah.
So I asked the guy from the state. I go, that's it? He goes, you got the car back, right? I said, okay. So I think nothing of it. Car goes to the pound. The insurance company takes it within a couple of days. It goes back in the shipping container, goes to France. I think nothing of it. I don't know, weeks or months pass. And one of the detectives in my office, who was a smart ass, goes, Vic, there's some guy on the phone with an English accent. And he goes, he's cursing you up and down about some car you've recovered. He goes, he's going to sue you, all this shit. I said, put him on the phone, right? Pick up, and he said, I was out of the country. You had no right to seize our car and our property and blah, 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 blah. What it is the wife probably asked him, what's going on with this car? He's pounding his chest now in front of her. So I let him talk. I go, you know what I noticed? That the woman in the car dealership with you, the pregnant one, you know who I'm talking about, right? The one with the chinchilla coat. That's not the diplomat wife of yours. Okay, detective, take care. And he got off the phone. Never heard from him again. Never heard another thing.
Oh my gosh, that's a great story. Okay, Vic, tell me, you had a little bit of interaction with 9/11. What was your experience with that?
9/11 was on a Tuesday. I was supposed to have court that day. And what wound up happening was a couple of days before 9/11, the week before, a guy I had taken a couple of stolen cars from had information about some dirtbag employees in DMV. I had two cases that almost went that way that went nowhere, but he had information supposedly about DMV employees pumping out driver's licenses. So we were going to set up in Manhattan court that morning a proffer. He was going to come in. He was in jail. We are going to get him pulled from Rikers. We're going to have his defense attorney there, the district attorney there. My sergeant and I were going to interview him. We were going to find out what information he had. Was it legit? And maybe work out a deal. It's called Queen for a day. So anything he tells us short of a homicide, we can't use against him. And if what he says sounded good, I would have signed him up as an informant and try to work that case. So I got to my office at 7 o'clock in the morning. The plan was to leave the office no later than 8 because it's going to take a while to get down to Manhattan, find parking, punch in, and get into the Manhattan District Attorney's office around 9. Get in at 7, 8 o'clock. Where's my sergeant? He comes in late. He's farting around the office. I'm like, come on. We got to get going. He goes, all right. So we're late. I'm already stressing out. We're going to be late. Our office was on the second floor of the housing police. One of the housing cops comes upstairs and he goes, put on the television set. A plane just hit the World Trade Center. So we put on the TV, watching it like everybody else. Here comes the second plane. Holy shit, this is terrorism. So the call comes from downtown, everybody get in uniform, stand by. And I don't know, 12 o'clock or something like that. We all got in different cars. The Queens guys all went in a bus. We took different vehicles. We drove down the west side. We parked, and it was like something out of a science fiction movie or horror movie. There was just papers and debris flying everywhere. And they were handing out those little masks that if you were going to demo your bathroom over the weekend, like you didn't want to get sheetrock in your lungs. And I remember just like the closer you got to ground zero, the darker it got. It was because that explosion of concrete and dust and all that crap was basically blocking the sunlight from getting in. So the closer you got to it, the darker it got. And I remember we were walking in on Broadway and everything, cars, food carts, everything was just covered in white, just this toxic dust. And I remember seeing hundreds, if not thousands of pairs of women's high heel shoes because all the women that worked in the financial district when they were fleeing can't run in heels, took off their shoes and just tossed them. And we were walking our way down Broadway and we noticed that like one of the apartment buildings, the maintenance staff stayed behind. So they let us in and gave us some food and snacks and stuff. And I'll never forget this. There was a guy in that building that was from Afghanistan. And he goes, I know who did this. And he told us chapter and verse because he lived in Pakistan as a little boy, was in the United States like 30 years. He was telling us about the Taliban and Osama bin Laden, and it's fascinating. Like, and then later on, you find out everything this guy said was true. And there was just so much wild shit going on. So, like, I remember a guy passed us, like, we're getting closer and closer to ground zero, and we don't know what to expect. Like, as a cop, I had 14 or 15 years in, so I had seen some horrific things, but I felt like a child not understanding what I was seeing because it was bigger than me. If that makes any sense, like,
Yeah.
you're a cop, you see someone shot, you see a bad car accident, your mind processes it. Like, okay, I know I got to do this. This was like, it was like being in a dream, essentially, that you're seeing things, but it's not computing. And I remember a guy in a spacesuit walked by us with some device that looked like a Geiger counter. And we're like, who the fuck is this guy? Like, is this guy work for the government? Or is it a guy from New Jersey that has a Geiger counter? Like, today's the day, you know? So we got up to as close as you could get to it. And I felt like Charlton Heston in the last scene of Planet of the Apes when he's looking at the Statue of Liberty head on the beach. There's a huge chunk of the facade that must have fallen a couple of 100 feet, just burned itself into the ground and was just standing there. Like, holy shit. And there was no rhyme or reason to any, like, there was paperwork, there was a laptop, there was a baseball from someone's desk. Like, it was, I hate to say this, but at least my opinion, I was pretty sure no one was getting out of that.
Yeah.
Like, everybody held out hope for weeks, days, and months, but, like, if you were down there enough, you knew. Everybody was just, those poor people were just disintegrated into that.
Yeah. Did you have to work down there for any extended period of time?
Yeah, I was there the first week,
Okay.
but the NYPD, there's 40,000 members, so
Yeah.
they would rotate us in and out. So, like, the first week we were there, it was so cloudy down there and stuff. I remember the second day, the next night I went back, or the day after. It was 1 or 2 days. It was so close. I remember, like, seeing cars, like, cops wrote "fuck you, Bin Laden" in the dust in people's cars that were left behind. There were cops from Chicago that drove down in a Winnebago, like, camper. Like like they were down there, like, within a day or two. Like, would they, like, blow every light from Chicago to get here? And, like, they were camped out, like a couple of blocks from ground zero. It was just wild, some of the stuff you saw down there. Um, then they pulled us out. And then I went back a couple of weeks later doing the bucket brigade. So we were like ants on a pile of sugar, passing debris in joint compound buckets that was getting sorted out later. Since I worked in the auto crime division, there's a dump out in Staten Island I think it's called Fresh Kills. They had closed it that year because it was full. They reopened it. And then when they started going in there with the heavy equipment and taking stuff out in bulk, with dump trucks and cranes coming in, pulling shit out. So they had us out there opening up the cars and cataloging the cars to make sure no one perished in a car. So I was going out to that dump. That was like being on the surface of the moon because that place is so high up in the air, and you got all that methane from years of things compost. It smells like a big fart there. And it's just so damn windy. You're like on top of this mountain of debris.
Any residual effects from working?
Thank God. I go for cancer screening every year.
Mm.
Thank God. I know a lot of people that have died from really weird and bizarre cancers, like guys that never smoked a day, in their lives and die of lung cancer. So just try to eat right and stay healthy. But I don't. But
But that cancer screening, is it specifically because you
yeah,
worked?
yeah.
Wow.
Anybody that was down there, it's federally funded, called the World Trade Center screening.
Every year then?
Yeah, every year, like blood, urine, chest X-ray.
Wow. Wow. Okay. Okay. All right. Let's get back to your auto crimes. BMW thief, Gerald.
Gerald. Get a phone call from BMW, the parts manager, and he says, I got this thing. He says, there's this guy, young guy, says he's a car dealer, comes in once a month with a title and his driver's license, and to get a key cut for a BMW. I said, yeah. He goes, it's been in here a bunch. I said, yeah. He says, well, today he comes in to get a key cut for a 7 Series. He says, I punch it in the computer, and that car's registered to some guy from New Jersey, and the car's in here now getting an oil change. So why is this guy getting a key cut? I said, do me a favor. Fax me every title he's sent you. So he sends me like 7 titles, and I'm running the VIN numbers. Stolen, stolen, stolen. I said, I know what he's doing. So I says, when is he coming back? He goes, later in the week. I said, all right, let's set up for Thursday. So Thursday, my partner and I get there bright and early. I tell the manager, do me a favor, call him up, tell him the key's ready. And me and my partner put on BMW outfit. My partner hung out in the waiting area. And I told the manager, when he comes in, just kind of give me the nod and go in the back. Don't want you getting involved in this. He goes, okay. Guy comes in, big Dominican kid, tattoos, throws the title at me, barks at me, here for my key. I said, okay. It was like $75 or something. Hands me 100. It's like the first time I've made change since I worked at McDonald's. Like, okay. So I go, oh, I got something for you. You're our 100th customer. So I come from behind the counter and my partner sneaks up on him. We cuff him up. The manager comes out and he goes, good job. And the guy goes, you fucking rat. What did I tell you? Stay in the back. Right? So while we're tossing this guy, he's got receipts to Mercedes and Land Rover, Range Rover. And we start running those VIN numbers. They come back stolen. So we were able to put a bunch of cars on him. What he was doing was he lived in right over the Hudson River in this luxury building in New Jersey. What he would do is he used their parking garages as hunting grounds. He would go downstairs, write down a VIN number of a car he wanted to steal, print up a title to match his driver's license, figuring they're not going to get their car serviced in Lower Manhattan. Come over the Hudson, go to this dealership, get keys made, go back to the parking lot, steal it, and then he had a guy that was shipping him out of the country.
Is there a way? I mean, if somebody wants your car, say you got a Mercedes, somebody wants your car. Is there any preventative measures that you can take to not get your car stolen?
Yeah, and the best way to do it's layers. The only overhead a car thief has is getting caught. They don't want to go to jail and they don't want to get beat up.
Mm-hmm.
So if you make your car, the more difficult it is, I mean, unless you've got something that really, really, really want, like a Rolls Royce or something, I wouldn't have to even steal that. But layers. So, most common cars, Hondas, pickup trucks, the cheapest sometimes is the best option to go. Get a hidden kill switch, wire it up to your starter or the battery, hide it somewhere under the dash, under the seat. Car thief's going to get in the car. He's going to try to start it. He's going to know there's a switch in there, but he's not going to take the time. It's like they're on the clock. As soon as I've had to steal a couple of cars in the line of duty on cases, and I know one car I got into and I couldn't start it right away. I jumped right out till we figured out it was a stick. And then I got back in it and I pushed the clutch, but it was in the middle of the night and it was a 5 Series BMW. I didn't know. But car thief, they're in that car, even the club, which I know it goes across the steering wheel. All you got to do is with a hacksaw blade, cut the steering wheel and pop the club up. It's time. It's an extra tool. So if you put a club in a hidden kill switch or an alarm, you're going to slow them down. It's just they're going to get in and they're going to get out. It's not worth their time.
Yeah. So as a detective, getting back to something you just said, why did you have to steal a car?
So I was working on a case. We had these guys from the West Indies out of the 4-7 precinct in the Bronx, and they were stealing high-end cars in Westchester County and bringing them in to the Bronx and chopping them. So we did a joint case with Janine Piro's office from the Westchester County District Attorney's Office. And what these guys were doing was they stole a 5 Series. They switched the plate on it to match another 5 Series. Then they put a business card in the window so you couldn't read the VIN number. And then they would go out at night with gloves and drive around Westchester County and steal cars. And if they ever got chased, 5 Series is going to outrun most cars. It handles better. And if they got an abandoned ship and dumped the car, it's not coming back to them. So what we did was we figured out when the car was stolen. I went to BMW, got a key cut. And what we did was late at night, I got dropped off on the block. I open the car. I get in. I go to start it, it's not starting. 3, 4 times, it's not starting. I get out, we go back. What happened? And I'll never forget it. The detective goes, "Is it a stick?" And I said, "I didn't even think." Get back in the car because it's dark and you're nervous wreck. And it's parked in front of this guy. It's parked in front of a guy's house, which I can tell you later on is now in jail for the rest of his life because he tried to kill a cop. Like he was deported as a result of that case, got deported, I think, to Jamaica, slipped back into the United States, and then was trying to steal a car in a Westchester County dealership a couple of years ago. A cop rolled up on him and he tried to kill the cop. But anyway, it's parked in front of that guy's house, and I knew he had a violent past. And the last thing in the world I want is this guy to come down and blow my head off. They drop me off again. I get in the car, feel the clutch, start the car up. I pull out. We had another detective on standby with another car, take the spot. Because the last thing in the world you want to do is you come back with the car an hour later and the spot's taken and now the car's up the block. The guy's not stupid. He's going to know somebody moved the car. Took it over to Highway 1 in the Bronx where we had our Taru guys, the tech people. They took the dash apart. They hardwired, I mean, this is 20 years ago. Nowadays, they could just probably slap something on. They hardwired a listening device that we could hear with the conversation in the car, and they put a tracking device in it. So now we could just follow them with a laptop as opposed to doing surveillance at night, follow them all over the place, and then you get burned. Now we can just follow them on a laptop. They stopped here for 15 minutes. Look at this. There's a police report for a stolen car.
Wow.
So that's how we were able to do that case.
How many stolen cars did you recover as a result of that?
I don't think we recovered many intact.
Yeah.
A handful, but probably these guys were that once we jumped on board, probably 15 or 20 stolen cars.
But I mean, it must have been a big enough. I'm assuming you didn't do that a whole bunch. It must have been a big enough case that you're like, hey, we need to put a tracker in there and figure out what these guys are doing. Or was that a common occurrence?
It depended on the case. It's dependent on the resources.
Okay.
A lot of that, as far as money is concerned, someone's got to pay for these things.
Yeah.
Right. So we did another case one time. We were buying Mercedes Benz for $5,000 a pop.
Yeah.
The money's got to come from somewhere. So, and it's like anything else with federal money.
Mm-hmm.
Whoever's kicking in the money is calling the shots. Right. So if a district attorney's office like Westchester had money and would go up on wiretaps like that, we pretty much played their song.
Yeah.
If they wanted to go on multiple wiretaps and keep this thing going, then you just keep it going. If someone is just interested in taking one or two guys off the playing field and that's it, then that's it.
How much did Lojack help your job?
Lojack was a game changer. So Lojack, when that first started, every NYPD precinct got this tracking device, and you were like you were like chasing submarine, you were like a submarine commander, and a code would flash. So you're driving around, this crazy code would flash. You would run it over the air, or you could run the code in your mobile digital. It would tell you the car was stolen. It would tell you the make, the model, and it was just a circle. And we were getting search warrants. It was a game changer, Lojack. And then, like everything else, the bad guys figured it out. We were tracking them in trees, right? Like the guys would find them and throw it in a tree, and then we're driving around. I got a funny story about Lojack. Every area had a Lojack liaison, which was usually a retired NYPD member, right? That would help you track or have like a super secret Lojack thing. So one day this guy calls us up and he goes, Lojack was making crossroads into Russia. So he says, I got a bunch of guys with the Moscow Police Department that want to visit an NYPD precinct and stuff. But yeah, we can accommodate them. So I don't know what to expect, right? The Lojack liaison shows up with like 5 or 6 of the roughest looking guys I've ever seen. They look like bouncers at a club. They did not look like cops. Like middle-aged guys with big hands. They all smoked. Like, wouldn't want to fuck with these guys, right? So their translator's probably KGB looking back, right? I mean, I was in my 20s. What did I know? And they were like kids. Like they see NYPD shows. So all these Russian badass Moscow cops, right, are playing with our sirens and shit and taking photos, and we're wearing the stupid furry hats. And so now we get to the question and answer segment of our show. And the translator, one guy goes, and the translator goes, how do you get confession out of like No, we have things like the Miranda law. Like you can't just go around tuning people up to get, and they're like just looking at us, right? Like pussies, right? Another question they asked is, well, what kind of gun do you find effective to stop car? Like we don't shoot into cars. No, 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 no. Unless someone's hanging out the window shooting at us, we don't shoot at cars. And they're like, right? So then Boris goes out to the car and he brings out these boxes, and they look like bronze Olympic gold medals. And we each get one. And it says something in Russian commemorating the 60th anniversary of the Moscow Police Department. Now, for all I know, it can say kiss my ass, capitalist pig, but it was nice. And they gave us these things, right? Typical NYPD fashion, the person that sent us there doesn't give us anything to give to these guys, right? So I felt bad. So I go, hold on a second. So I go up to the locker room. I grab a plastic garbage bag. This is so trashy. And I find hats laying around that broken nightsticks, old holsters and shit, just crap laying around the locker room, right? I come downstairs with this bag, and these guys are fighting over this shit. Like the bag tears open, and the guy I worked with goes, these fucking guys, they're fighting. I go, you better keep your mouth shut. We'll get our asses. I had to make a second run up there. Like they were like kids in a candy store with this stuff.
That was a nice touch, though, from you.
That was my experience with the Moss. They were nice guys. I didn't understand a word they were saying. I wouldn't, but they were rough looking dudes, man.
Yeah. Tell me about breaking up a cockfight.
I'm in the auto crime division, and I had made a couple of arrests that had nothing to do with auto crime. Nothing. I think one was a gun, and another was a gambling arrest. And my lieutenant calls me in the office, goes, "Love what you're doing. Stick to auto crime." I go, "But boss, I walked it." Vic, stick to auto crime. I said, "Okay." So my sergeant a couple of days later goes, "We're getting killed with these Vespas." And the Vespas are these motorized Italian motorized scooters that these hipsters drive around in Manhattan. And they're getting robbed on the upper east or west side of Manhattan. He goes, "Look into this. See if you can put a dent in this to make it go away. The precinct commanders are calling up. They want auto crime to solve their problems." I said, "All right." So I got a list of about 5 or 7 of these things. Running the plates. They're all still active except one. One of the Vespas was recovered in an arrest in the 4-4 precinct off of Hawkstone Avenue, off the Grand Concourse. Okay. In my mind, as a detective, I'm saying to myself, it's a bunch of kids that are going up there. They're robbing these things. They're bringing them back to Hawkstone Avenue. I'm going to go there, and they're going to be running into each other. I'll just hang out up there a couple of days, and I'm going to pick these kids off, right? My partner and I go up there. No Vespas, nothing. So the neighborhood is littered with 6-story tenement buildings. Each one of these buildings have these underground caverns where the superintendent lives. And in these basements, you have common areas where people store motorcycles, the equipment to shovel snow. People store stuff they pay extra to store. So I said, I'll bet you these Vespas, then I parked in the street, these kids are going to have them either in their apartment or they're going to keep them in the common area of these buildings around Hawkstone Avenue. So one by one, I start going into these basements, find the super's apartment, knock on the door, the super comes out. "My friend, can you show me around?" "Sure." And these guys were proud to show off their underground lairs. It was like, the basement of Disney World, right? And I'm going around, they're showing me these things, and no Vespas, right? Did this to about 10 buildings. The 11th building, my partner goes, "Come on, let's go." One more. We go into this building. I knock on the door, and I hear laughing, like hysterical laughter in this apartment. I knock on the door opens, and the super is about 5 feet tall. He looked like Tattoo from Fantasy Island. Like he had jet black hair. I'm hit with the smell of weed. His eyes are glassy, and he looked like he's seen a ghost. And I go, "Poppy, is it okay if you could just show us around down here, see if there's any, we're looking for these Vespas?" And he just looks at me. And I go, and I repeat it, and he goes, "Yeah, okay, okay." So he gets his keys, and he's a nervous wreck. He's just nervous. Everybody else is proud to show me this thing. This guy looks like I just gave him a cancer diagnosis, right? So we're walking in this lair, and this common area, it's got like these 2 doors with a latch on it. And he goes to put the key in the lock, and he drops the keys. And I go, "Are you all right?" "Yeah, yeah, yeah." He opens it up. He pushes the wall open. He puts on the light. And there's got to be 50, 100 birds, roosters and hens, just running around the floor. And then on the walls are pods, like cages. I guess those were the fighting cocks. Like, I guess the other ones were in training, but like, then you had like another 50 birds in pods. I know what this is. I mean, who the fuck? He's not harvesting eggs. This is for cockfighting, right? I'm looking at him. He's looking at me, and I go, I remember what my sergeant said, my lieutenant said, and I go, "You got any Vespas?" He goes, "No." It's all right. It's okay. It's okay. "Oh, okay." He locks the place. He locks it up. My partner goes, "What are you going to do?" I said, "What do you think?" I get on the phone. I get my sergeant on the phone. I says, "Get the fucking cavalry down here." I says, "I just walked into the world's biggest cockfighting thing," and I'm explaining it to him. He goes, "What did the lieutenant tell you?" I said, "You don't understand. This is going to be big. We're going to make so much overtime. I've never made an animal cruelty case, but I'm sure I can figure it out. Just get the whole office down here." He goes, "The lieutenant left for the day. I'm not going to bother him with this stuff. Call the ASPCA." "You've got to be kidding me." He goes, "Call the ASPCA." At the time, there was a television show called Animal Precinct on Animal Planet. It's a cable show. And it was about the ASPCA police. And they went out with cameras and they filmed them. The ASPCA has these peace officers that they go around and lock people up for animal cruelty. People call up, "My neighbor's dog is barking." They check to see if the dog is all right. I call up, I get the guy on the phone that I hear on TV. And I explained to him what it is. And he goes, "You got to be kidding me." He goes, "This sounds huge." I says, "I know." He goes, "All right, thank you for the information." He goes, "I'll tell you what." He says, "Let me look into this." He goes, "If we get a search warrant," he goes, "I'll call you up. Maybe you can get a taste of overtime." I said, "Done. Thank you." Week or two goes by. I take a couple of days off. That's another story. I'm helping my father put a fence in my aunt's yard. My father doesn't know how to use an auger. My father's using this auger and it hooks a root and he looks like he's square dancing, going around in circles. I think my father's going to break his arm. So I give him a shot. I knock him off the auger. He tears his shirt. Then he wants me to pay for the shirt. Anyway, I'm picking my father up off the floor and the auger's going, right? The phone rings. It's a guy from the ASPCA. He goes, "This is going to be big." He goes, "We got search warrants lined up." He goes, "This is going to be all over the city and everything." I says, "I'm helping my old man with this fence and I'm going to have to buy him a shirt. Enjoy." He goes, "All right, thanks, buddy," right? A couple of days later, I come into work. It's on the front page of one of the major papers. Largest cockfighting ring in New York City history busted. So my sergeant goes, "Is this?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Wow." He walks in, just should have just left it alone. Walks in and tells the lieutenant, and the lieutenant goes, "My lieutenant was one of these guys. He was always on the outside looking in. Like, he never met a press. He was always trying to get into a press conference. That he would have wanted me to do." And he goes, "Why didn't you tell me?" And the sergeant's like, and I says, "You told me to stick to autocrime." And that's just basically where it ended. But yeah, I was involved in breaking up the city's largest cockfighting ring, and I wasn't even there.
How were your talking about your lieutenant sergeant stuff? How were your supervisors over the years? Did you have good leaders?
Yes. I can honestly say from patrol to specialized units, 99% of the supervisors I had, I was very lucky because you hear stories and I've
Yeah.
seen guys that I wouldn't want to work for and guys like crying like, "Oh God Almighty!" But I was very lucky that the guys that I worked under
Yeah.
were good and all had the common goal.
So in your mind, what makes a good supervisor? What makes a good leader?
Someone that doesn't panic. I could never be a supervisor. I'm difficult enough managing myself, and you can't keep three people happy, right? One guy wants to go this way, and one guy wants to go this way, and the other guy's trying to please everybody. That's a unique skill set that I don't have. But from what I've seen, is those guys tend to thrive in chaos. They can keep a cool head. They try to be as fair as possible. They reward good work and behavior, and they try not to take things personally.
Mm, okay. Okay. Any common any common denominator between the good supervisors? I mean, they all kind of had that quality. Did they, like, for example, any of them like prior military and maybe I'm just kind of spitballing
No,
here, but
okay, I know what you're asking. I would say the ones that I wouldn't want to work for
Okay.
were the ones whose father, mother, relative was in a coveted position in the department or political that moved them around up around the chessboard.
Mm.
And they never really had to worry about things going wrong because that relative could get them out of the fire.
Yeah.
So it was guys that put in the work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I remember like a place like Auto Crime, a lot of the supervisors were hooked. Most of them were great, but every now and then you would get like an enlightened child and they didn't, you know, it's like, well, you know, you do something stupid, you're going to get in trouble. You're not going to get in trouble. I'm going to get in trouble.
Yeah.
So we're not going to do that. So, but I always found it was the ones that put in the work from the ground level and stopped at every floor
Okay.
on the elevator.
Okay. All right. How about the Pathmark drug case?
I'm in Auto Crime, and that's why I said everything starts at DMV. We get a phone call from, I think it was Manhattan North Narcotics major case. And they said, we have an informant who's got a DMV employee that's pumping out bad drugs. So he says, this guy is a great informant. I said, all right. So it's pouring rain. It's like this time of year. It's pouring rain in New York. We get in the car. My sergeant and I are in the back seat. We drive into the Bronx from Manhattan. We meet this kid in a diner. The kid gets in the car, lays out. And to go into how that works, in DMV, to get your driver's license, first, before you take your permit, you got to prove who you are. So you got to bring a utility bill, a birth certificate, all a not driver's license, high school diploma, and to prove who you are. So the way the scam works is the employee, there's always a middleman. The middleman brings the person that wants the license there. The middleman will point out that person to the guy behind the counter. You'll step up with a bunch of paperwork that's nonsense. They're going to pretend that they verified everything, and they're just going to circle things on their paperwork that they saw this, they didn't see anything. Back then, they didn't keep the paper, they didn't scan it or hold on to it. They're just pretending that they verify it. Mm-hmm. So now you can be Vic Ferrari. Now that they've certified who you are, now you go take the permit, pass the permit, now you pass the driver's license, and now you're Vic Ferrari with a phony social and all that other nonsense. So anyway, he tells us how the scam works. So we ask, if we introduce you to an undercover, would you introduce him to your guy? You step off, and then our guy will start getting the driver's license. Yeah, no problem. Okay. So it's pouring rain out. It's in the winter. We drive back over the bridge into Manhattan on 218th Street. He goes, I'm going to get out here. Puts on his hoodie and disappears into the night. So the two detectives turn around and they go, what do you think? Oh, this is great. Thank you so much. And we're just shooting the shit. You know this guy, you know that guy. While we're talking, someone just walked past the car. A couple of minutes later, the phone rings. It's the CI. And he's calling his handler in the front seat. And I hear the guy going, yeah? Where? Him? Really? Okay. Gets off the phone. He goes, you're not going to believe this. Try me. He goes, that was the CI. The guy that just walked past us, he looks like a delivery guy carrying a brown shopping bag and plastic. He's a courier. Our CI knows him. He's going to make a drop. You guys mind hanging around helping us? Fuck yeah, let's do this, right? So we follow him down Broadway, and there's a Pathmark parking lot. Packed. So we just kind of lay back on this kid, gets into the Pathmark parking lot, goes to the back of a Honda Accord, opens the back door and gets in with the bag. He's in there 30 seconds. He gets out of the car, no bag. And he steps off. So you want me to bail and I'll grab the kid a block or two away. And they said, no, we don't want to burn the CI. Let's get the drugs. We'll figure out who that guy is later. We said, okay, whatever you're narcotics, do what you want to do. So we cut the car off in the parking lot. It's a guy and a woman from Trenton, New Jersey. They had a kilo. We got him cuffed, sitting on the floor. And you would know this in your world. The narcotics detective's like, oh shit, it's only a kilo. So they go, only a kilo ago. Yeah, our sergeant really wants us, if we're going to do something like this more than, he goes, do you guys want this arrest? So I turned to my sergeant and I go, I'll take this. He goes, we're already on overtime. Lieutenant's going to have a shit fit. The guy and the woman are sitting on the floor listening to this, the two perps that cuffed, and one of them says, I can't believe you four guys are deciding who's going to take us to jail. So ultimately, the major case guys took the arrest for the kilo and stuff. But it's just the things like that would jump off that you would never expect.
Yeah. So how often did that actually happen, Vic? I mean, I got to imagine things are happening all the time in New York. How often did it happen where you were on something and all of a sudden something else would happen?
All the time. All the time. One time, there's a spot in the Bronx I used to call my fishing hole, and I worked that spot as a cop on patrol, in plain clothes in the precinct, in auto loss, in auto crime. It's it's a stretch of roadway off the Major Deegan Expressway. It's about a mile and a half long. On one side, you have a cemetery. On the other side, you have a wooded park, and it's right off the highway. So people park their cars a mile long. They walk and they get on the train. There's no one around. People break into cars and steal cars all the time there. So we would just sit there with a set of binoculars and pick off car thieves. Like, you want to go to the spot? Yeah, we haven't been up there in a while. Sometimes we would follow the guy in a stolen car to where he went and get a search warrant. Sometimes we would just roll up and get them in the middle of stealing the car. It just depends. All the time, right? So one time, see this woman get off the train. She's walking and she's got her head down, and you see this skinny little crackhead, and he's following her. You probably know this with body language. Someone's walking, they're either looking straight ahead, they got their head down. When someone's turning around, looking around, stopping, tying their shoe, they're dusting themselves off. They want to see if someone's around, someone's following. This kid's like, I'm like, I don't think he's going to break into a car. I think he's going to rob this woman. Sure enough, runs up on her, pulls her bag, and now he's running towards us. So we just got out of the car, pretending like we were walking for the bus, and just tackled him. So that was like one of those cases where you're sitting on one thing and something else jumps on.
Yeah. I mean, Stiasny mentioned that it was the greatest show on earth. And I got to imagine working NYPD, that's exactly what it is.
You could never plan. You could, but it wouldn't go your way. There were times where I says, I can't make an arrest tonight. I just absolutely can't. And here I am. It either had to be done, or it was too good that I wasn't going to give this away.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Tell me about the HIV car thief.
Later in my career, my partner was off. Another guy in the office who I like to work with, his partner was off. He's on the phone for about 10 minutes. He goes, I just got the strangest phone call. I said, what's up? He goes, some guy's on the phone and he says his boyfriend stole a car. I said, yeah. He goes, the guy goes into clubs in Manhattan, and what he does is he waits until the hat check girl or guy disappears. He runs into the cloakroom. He starts going through people's pockets. He gets their key fob. Then he walks around the neighborhood pushing the key fob, and that's how he steals a car. He goes, he's got a Mitsubishi Galant parked on, I think it was on somewhere up in the 4-3. He says he swapped the plates on it already. He says, but the car is sitting up there. I said, okay. And he goes, you want to sit on it? I said, all right. So we got another guy in the car. So the three of us ride up there. We're sitting on this thing for a couple hours, and the car's not moving. So I says, well, let's see if we can get them to move this thing faster. So we went into a bodega and got a dozen eggs and egged the shit out of the car. A lot of times that will motivate somebody to move a stolen car, because if they got an order for it or something, they go, what the fuck? And they'll go and get the car washed. So that doesn't motivate them. We're still sitting up there. So one of the guys we're working with gets hungry, and he goes, we got to get something to eat. So I said, all right, go get something to eat. Take the car. We'll stand on the corner. If someone gets in the car, we'll yoke this guy ourselves. We'll call you. He goes, all right. Guy's gone 5 minutes. I see the light blinking. I go, fucking believe it. So my buddy and I, we see this guy in a big yellow canary fleece, and he's looking at the car, and you can tell he's pissed the car is egged. And he's flicking the eggshells off, right? I go, that's him. So I tell my buddy, I says, I'm going to walk on the sidewalk. I go, you walk across the street. When we start in parallel, I says, as soon as he gets in that car, I'm going to come up on the passenger side. You get him on the driver's side. He goes, all right. As soon as he gets in that car, I run up on him and I get the door open. And he looks at me. I go, get the fuck out of the car. He starts the car and he puts it in drive. So now he's ramming, reverse drive, ramming the cars. I'm in the car and I'm punching him. Finally, my buddy distracts him enough. I get the key out of the ignition. I toss it. Now he's got nowhere to go. I run around the car and we're pulling this guy. And he got out, and we later find out he's a bodybuilder.
Mm.
I'm 5'9" and 165 pounds. The other guy was a little heavier than me, and it was a fight. Like, he's punching us, we're punching him, he's falling down, I'm falling down, I grab his legs, knock him down. It's just, and while we're fighting, I notice a crowd forms. Now, the crowd isn't hostile, but they're watching it, and no one's calling 911, right? So finally, I'm like, where's my radio? I look, my radio popped out and had slid a little halfway underneath the car. And my buddy either didn't have a radio or he couldn't get it. And we're talking while we're fighting with this guy. And I go, and the guy could hear us. And I'm like, can you hold him just a second? And he goes, go for it. Got the radio, 10:13. Now you hear the cavalry coming. I go, dude, I'm telling you right now, it's time to give up. I says, in a second, there's going to be a cavalry here. And he goes, all right. He let us cuff him. Cuff the guy up. We're covered in blood. Just covered in blood. Put him in the radio car. Guy shows up with the food. What happened? So, so much more to this story. I encourage you to read my book.
Yeah.
So, the guy goes, can I talk to you? And I'm pissed. I go, what the fuck do you want to talk about? He goes, I'm HIV positive. I said, oh, shit. So I tell my buddy. So we all in 2 cars go to the hospital. The guy with the food is dealing with the prisoner who's covered in blood. We run into the hospital, we're covered in blood. We find, like in a hospital, you got those little closet bathrooms. Like, we kick in the door. That water is super hot. And you've got like that super soap. And my buddy and I are just, this is the good stuff. Like, just scrubbing and pulling off our clothes, right? And I'm looking. Do I got any nicks? Do I got any open cuts, right? So finally, we got seen together by the emergency room doctor. Really nice guy. And he goes, what's your concern? I said, what's my concern? I says, the guy in the next cubicle just told us he's HIV positive and we're covered in his blood. And he goes, I examined you both. He goes, I don't see any open cuts and wounds on you. He says, did it get in your eyes? I said, no, that much I knew. No. He says, there's 2 ways we can go with this. He says, I can start you on an experimental antiviral cocktail of drugs. I said, okay. He says, but I'm just going to tell you, some people have had some adverse reactions to it. It might harm your kidneys, your liver. So he goes, I'll let you 2 talk it out. You let me know what you want to do. I told my wife, what do you want to do? We're like 2 children. What do you want to do? I said, I think we're good. I says, what do you say? I said, I'm not going to do it. And he goes, fuck it, I'm not going to do it either. So every 6 months, we had to go get tested and did it for a couple of years. And thank God.
Wow.
Yeah. But I mean, that's the things people don't realize with cops, like getting stuck with a needle.
Absolutely.
Or you're fighting with people and,
After you were a very, very busy cop and detective, especially in New York, was there any situation where, obviously that was a bad situation. Any close calls where you actually had to shoot somebody or might have had to shoot somebody?
I have never shot anybody.
Yeah.
I've come very close a handful of times, and 2 right off the bat that I will never forget. One time it was a Saturday morning, early 90s. I was in uniform. We got called to a high-rise building up in Riverdale, nice building. And it wasn't a heavy call or anything. And knocking on the door. And the door down the hallway opens up. And a kid comes running out with a silver handgun. Just comes running out with a silver handgun. And he stopped. And my partner and I, we had 38s at the time. We just drew and I said, drop that bucket. And he just dropped it. And what it was is he came running out, playing around with his 8-year-old cousin or brother. And thank God he dropped it. And then the mother beat the shit out of him. She's like, are you kidding me? I told you. Like, dragged him back inside. And we're like,
gosh.
I mean, she lit into him.
Wow. Okay. So, Vic, can you tell me about the Audi case?
So it's probably around 1999, and we're losing Audis like crazy. And I'm talking like every month we're losing 15, 20, 30 Audis a month, and they're not turning up anywhere. So usually when somebody has a big order for things, we're going to find the bones of the car. We're going to find them stripped. We're going to catch a guy driving it. These things were just vanishing off the face of the earth. So we knew they're getting shipped from somewhere. Then we start getting phone calls from and finding out things from different police departments that it's not just in the 5 boroughs of New York City, Jersey, Connecticut. Car dealerships are getting hit over the weekend. 5, 10 cars are vanishing. Where the hell are these cars going? So this guy on lifetime parole in Florida gets caught trying to boost a BMW out of the Palisades Mall in Rockland County. Rockland County calls us and tells us, we got this guy, he's talking about Audis and like, we'll be there in 5 minutes. We get there and New York State police are there because they had an angle on it. And what we find out is we're debriefing this guy and he says, look, he says, there's this guy, Mario. He's in charge. He works for this Jamaican guy, Ian. And we steal as many Audi A6s as we can. We park them on Bronx streets. We let them cool off for a day or two. Then we take them all at once. We take them out to Brooklyn first thing in the morning. We park them by a park, and Ian hands the keys to a Chinese guy. He says, and we leave. He goes, only once I was in the warehouse. He goes, and it's all Chinese guys. Chinese, never, like, most of the shipping cases are Dominicans, Russians, West Indies. We had never heard of Chinese shipping cars. Like the running joke in my office was we didn't know how the Dominican Republic didn't sink with all the stolen cars and heavy equipment that was getting shipped out there. We couldn't keep up. He says it's Chinese. So while we're interviewing this guy and debriefing him, I'm asking him about his crew. Who's this guy? Who's that guy? What's this guy? And it's usually mostly first names, the street they hang out with. And he says, one guy's name is Fast. And I go, tell me about Fast. He goes, he kills people. I says, well, how many people has he killed? He goes, how many fingers and toes do you have? And I said, come on. He goes, I'm serious. He goes, he's killed a lot of people. So he told us vaguely about a couple of homicides. We're like, all right, we'll look into it. So through that guy's information and through the Westchester, we did this case with the Westchester District Attorney's Office. We go up on the thieves' phones originally because the Chinese had a warehouse. The state police were following too closely like 6 months or a year earlier. They burned it. The Chinese went underground. They had nothing. So what we did was we went up on phones on the main guy, this guy, Ian Dedrick, who was basically the point guard. And then his main guy was the thief, Mario. And then Mario had a fiefdom of car thieves under him. So it worked like this. The Chinese would call up Ian and say, we want 5 cars this week, 10 cars this week. They would pay the Jamaican guy $5,000 a car. The Jamaican would pay Mario $1,000 a car, and Mario would dole out between 100 and 500 per car. Okay. So in addition, we find out that while these guys are stealing cars and they're getting shipped, our car thieves are in the murder for hire business. And now we're on this wiretap and they're talking about whacking this guy, whacking that guy. And this guy, Fausto Gonzalez, who's like the focal point of a lot of these hits. As a matter of fact, at one point during this case, these guys went down to Virginia and they burglarized a Harley Davidson dealership. They cut power off to the place. They rented a U-Haul and they cleaned this place out. Jackets, helmets, bikes in crates. Bring it back to the Bronx and they keep it in this guy James King's garage. And they're selling shit out of the garage. And what winds up happening is one of the neighborhood kids finds out about it, breaks into this guy's garage. So this guy, James King, and this other guy, Charles Dargan, they're still in jail, kill this kid over breaking into his garage, stealing the things that he stole from Virginia. But anyway, after the cars get into this warehouse, you have Chinese nationals working there. And what they do is they bring in a shipping container, they drive an Audi in, they let the air out of the tires so it sits low. Then they build a wooden frame above it. Then they bring up another Audi, they hoist it and put it. So you're getting 2 cars per shipping container. Then they call a trucking company. Trucking company comes a couple of times a week, takes that container out to Newark, New Jersey. It gets placed on a train. It gets railed to Long Beach, California. and it's sent out to Shanghai. So these guys were doing about 30 cars a month. And it was interesting because that's what I was saying earlier with Bok Choy. We had to bring on Chinese detectives to monitor the phone conversations. And it just was, the case had so many twists and turns. At one point, my lieutenant had me on a roof across the street from this guy, Dean, the Jamaican guy's house. And in the back of his house, he had a garage. So I'm up there on a 4 to 12 on this rooftop. He drives in a Dodge Caravan. The car's in there for about 2 hours. The Caravan backs all the way up. He drops it off on White Plains Road. He goes back into his house and shuts off the light. So my lieutenant goes, Vic, because I filmed it. He goes, get off the roof, go up to White Plains Road and snatch that car. I said, all right, boss. I go up there. Car's running. I open up the door. I see a milk crate. Seats are gone. Now, believe it or not, it's not the first time I've had to drive a car in a milk crate, but like, okay. I get in the car, I shut the door, and I realize I'm trapped. He had stripped the whole interior. The door panels were gone. The dash was gone. So I can't get out. It's pitch black in the car. It's just the whole interior has been stripped. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh shit. To get rid of fingerprints, he sprayed the entire interior with WD-40. So now I'm sliding around in this thing. I'm like, oh shit, right? With that, a van from the 4-7 precinct goes by. And I said, oh shit. And they gave me the hairy eyeball. They gave me a dirty look. They went up the block and I said, oh shit. They're going to come around. They're going to run the plate. They're going to say, get out of that car. I'm not going to be able to roll down the window or open the door. And they're going to break that window and I'm going out the door. I'm going out the window, right? I'm trying to get on the radio, but my hand, I can't find the frequency and it's pitch black. When they made a U-turn, I slapped that thing in drive and took off, right? Now I'm getting chased. And I got a 4-7 police van chasing me and I'm on a milk crate covered in WD-40 and I'm screaming into the radio to my field team, tell the 4-7 to get this van to back off. I lose the van for a couple of seconds and there's a Metro North parking lot off of 233rd and Webster Avenue. I drove in there and I'm hearing the van circling. I got to the back of the van. I kicked the back window out and I got out and then I was able to get on the radio and everything. My coworkers thought that was the funniest thing in the world. That I almost got killed driving a van. Yeah.
By NYPD. So Vic,
what blows up that case is we've got wiretaps going. We're working all these angles. They got greedy. And the main subject, this guy Mario Lopez, used to be a doorman in Manhattan, and he made friends with a guy that was a parking attendant. So Mario calls up his friend. We're listening to this. The wiretaps. He goes, "How'd you like to make $3,000?" The guy goes, "What do I got to do?" He goes, "I'm going to come in there this week with about 10 guys. We're going to tie you up, put you in the trunk of a car. You give us the keys to these cars, and we're going to steal them. When the cops show up, you just tell them we're wearing ski masks." He goes, "All right." We got a van parked across the street, film the whole thing. 10 guys walk in, the cars come out. The last car was in Brooklyn when the 911 call came over because they put him in a car right in the front and told him, give him about 15 minutes and then start making a lot of noise. That guy went to jail. So what winds up happening is on the wiretap, Mario is talking to one of his thieves. He goes, "Did you check those cars for Lojack?" And the guy said, "Yeah." He goes, No. "Did you sweep it for Lojack?" He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "Are you sure?" He goes, "Yeah." He didn't. So Macy's, in the NYPD, Macy's doesn't tell gimbals. We didn't tell the cops in that Brooklyn precinct that we had a warehouse where cars were getting shipped to China because the cops would have been driving around every 15 minutes taking pictures.
Okay, so wait a minute. You said Macy's and gimbals. What are you talking about?
In other words, organized crime doesn't tell the precinct cops what's going on.
Got it.
You never know if there's a bad cop, God forbid.
Got it.
Or cops are curious by nature. You tell them something, they got to see for themselves.
Yeah.
We don't want to burn it.
Okay.
The Lojack beacon starts pinging. A lieutenant and his driver track it there. No search warrant. They run into the place. They see Chinese guys. It throws them. They go, and they had a false wall in this place. That's how sophisticated they are. And they go, "Are there any stolen cars there?" And the Chinese guys will be right back. They ran out the back door, right? Now the case is blown. Now I was up in Elmsford, New York, doing something with DMV. Get back to the office. We all had folders. Just start picking these guys, picking up that guy's. I was tasked that night with grabbing a couple of the factory workers. Now, the factory workers, they were kind of like the guppies in the case. Like, one of the detectives had followed them to a street, but we only had surveillance photos of them. We didn't have my deed yet. So my partner and I were circling the block, and he goes, Vic, I don't know if this means anything. He says, but I just saw two Chinese guys come out of an alleyway with suitcases on. Throw the car in reverse, pull up, we start talking to them, and they're playing dumb. They're talking to me in Chinese. I stuck my hand down the guy's shirt, and I felt his heart going 100 miles an hour. And in his top pocket, he had a plane ticket to Toronto.
Oh, man.
So I called, I don't know if it was Bok Choy or one of the other Asian detectives, and they came over, and they had been following them.
Mhm.
They go, that's them. So we just lucked out catching those two guys that were catching a plane that night out of town. We
Yeah.
would have never have caught them.
Yeah.
So when it was all said and done, everybody got, let's see, the main guy, the main Chinese guy, Min Jin Yang, who was a Chinese intelligence official, supposedly retired. I don't buy it. He got 10 years for enterprise corruption, which is like a RICO statute for state. Mario, the main thief, was the getaway driver on a lot of Fausto's homicides. He rolled and gave up Fausto and all the homicides he was involved in. Everybody went to jail, did significant jail time as a result of that.
Wow. So how many were you able to solve homicides off that case? How many do you think?
With Fausto, I think he was convicted of a federal hit in Hartford, Connecticut. Then the Manhattan District Attorney's Office got him for 3 or 4, but I think they closed with that whole case about 13.
Wow. Wow. Fascinating. Okay, so 20 years with the NYPD. Did it affect your family?
No. I wasn't married. I had no children.
Okay.
The job was my life. I mean, I was still very close with my parents and my relatives, but I could see how if I was married and did have children, there would be no way I could have been involved in it as much as I was.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed coming to work. There was very far and few between where I dreaded going into work for anything.
Yeah. So you seem like a very upbeat person. I watch your podcast. There's a lot of funny stories, stuff like that. Can you look back on when you started NYPD, 21 years old, to even now? Did being in law enforcement affect the way that you see people or see people in society at all?
Oh, absolutely. How can it not? But you can't be one of those people that I know cops, and female and male, that it just affects them. They're jaded. They hate everything. They hate everybody. And I kind of think that goes to, I hate to say this because patrol is the backbone of the NYPD, and they do God's work, but you're in the same precinct, you're driving in circles, everybody's coming to you with their problems. When you're a detective working on different cases, every day is different. There's a lot more freedom, a lot more flexibility. There's a lot more problem solving as opposed to being on patrol. Yeah, I try not to take, I mean, of course, there were times where I got really mad or something, but you can't let it eat you up like that. You can't.
But it's interesting because you said, the patrol guys are rolling around and but you do a little bit different stuff and you're problem solving with the detective and stuff. But what do you think that you did personally? Why didn't you think that you got jaded?
I'm sure I am. I'm not the 18 or 20-year-old boy that I was when I took the job, obviously, but I think it's an acquired superpower you get when you go into law enforcement, especially if you work at your craft. You study body language, social cues, tics. If you don't have the gift of gab, you had better learn it. If you want to be successful, you go into meetings, you're dealing with different personalities. You got to size somebody up in seconds if you're doing any kind of undercover work. I guess, I mean, for me, I hit the ground running with it. It definitely changed me, but I think I learned a lot of survival skills as a result of my experience. Probably a little jaded, but not to the degree where I'm a miserable person. You can't. It'll eat you up.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So, audience, 8 books here by Vic. I've only read one of them. It was super entertaining. Can you tell the audience again what's the name of your podcast?
My podcast is called NYPD Through the Looking Glass Podcast. I interview ex-cops, a lot of NYPD members from different units, cops from different police departments, different agencies. I've had a couple of ex-gangsters on there, which that's always a trip to talk to somebody that was on the other side of the fence. I had a professional car thief on. I started off, I go, can you believe, would you think 15 years ago you'd be talking to a retired auto crime detective, because I would have told you you're out of your mind.
Well, audience, I can vouch for the fact that it's a very entertaining podcast, and if I know you have enjoyed this interview, and so please tune into Vic's podcast because you're going to get the same type of stories that he told here. So, Vic, I can't thank you enough for the interview. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Nas. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.